So Martha already gave you the teaser, but I'm going to say it again. We're going to talk about a lot of UU history this morning. This is probably more UU history than I have ever talked about in a sermon before, but I think it's really interesting. And hopefully you will think it's interesting when I tell you about it. It's really important context for this moment that we find ourselves in, to know the history and background of things that we're talking about as a faith. So we're going to dive into it together. We learned from Martha today that the seventh UU principle has only existed since the 1980s. I was surprised the first time I found this out, and you might be surprised too. That is not that old, all things considered. And before the seventh principle, we had 6 slightly different principles that we adopted when the Unitarians and Universalists came together, which you can see our current principles reflected in a little bit. And there's also a lot of language that we wouldn't use today. Like the first 6th principle, to encourage cooperation with men of goodwill in every land. You can kind of see in there why Lucille and her friends wanted to make some changes. And so in 1985, we ended up with the principles we know today, the 7 UU principles. And the bylaws of our association say that Article 2, the piece of our bylaws that have the principles in them right now, should get reviewed no less than every 15 years. A former moderator of the UUA, Ginny Von Corder, said, the 15-year rule is there to ensure that nothing becomes accidentally creedal. That means nothing becomes a thing we say everyone has to believe in, despite the fact that we say we are a faith that doesn't have something everyone has to believe in. So, in 1985, the principles as they currently stand. And then in 2006, we were a little overdue, it turns out. And so the UUA board appointed an existing commission, the Commission on Appraisal, to start this review. They talked to UUs and made curricula and took feedback and had conversations. And then they gave us just a few small revisions, mostly around the specific language that was in Article 2. And in 2009, we voted on this at General Assembly. And I think unlike when we adopted the 7th principle, there was much debate, many people up at the mics, and these revisions failed by 13 votes at our General Assembly. And so the principles and Article 2 continued as they were. And we have made smaller changes, not a whole big revision. In 2017, similar to the story that Martha told us, we changed the words of one of our sources from prophetic words and deeds of men and women to prophetic words and deeds of people. So changing language with the times to reflect who we are. And we also voted on whether to change the first principle from the inherent worth and dignity of all people to the inherent worth and dignity of all beings, but that one didn't pass. So in 2020, again, slightly more than 15 years had passed, and we started talking about an 8th principle as a denomination. Paula Cole-Jones, a Black woman who served as the director of racial and social justice in one of our regions, started thinking about the ways that we might incorporate beloved community alongside our principles as something important to us as UUs. As she continued to work, she realized that actually it might make sense to make this idea of beloved community part of our principles, inviting UUs to think and talk more deeply about anti-racism and anti-oppression. And so she collaborated with Bruce Pollock Johnson, a lay UU, to create the language that eventually became the proposed 8th principle. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. You probably can see some of our UU values in that statement. And so in 2017, the Church of the Restoration, where Bruce was a member, adopted the eighth principle as part of their covenant. And they started recommending that it be adopted by congregations around the country and by the UUA itself. So since that time, hundreds of congregations have adopted the eighth principle. And this year, we may be one of them. We'll adopt it to continue to promote and affirm the importance of dismantling racism and other oppressions in ourselves, in our congregations, and in our wider denomination. And at the same time that all of that was happening, the UUA appointed an Article 2 study commission because we were again overdue for that review. And the commission was given the charge to really dig into Article 2 and to consider any updates to it, which might include not having principles at all, or having more principles or fewer. And Paula Cole-Jones was invited to be part of the commission to make sure that the ideas of that eighth principle would be considered in any of the new language of Article 2. And y'all, this commission has been working so hard. I am so grateful to them, and I do not envy them this work. And I want to give a particular shout out to two of the commissioners who are now emerging adults, but began this process when they were youth, who committed to our denomination in a way of so much time and energy and effort to make sure that our Article 2 reflects who we are as Unitarian Universalists. So the commission has had retreats and conversations, worships, town halls, surveys, so many ways to try to understand what is the heart of Unitarian Universalism. They've talked to UUs of all ages, identities, and experiences to learn what Unitarian Universalism means to them and how that might get reflected in Article 2. And so in the fall, they put out their first draft of the proposal. And then they got more feedback and more conversations and so many more surveys and more questions. You may remember that Reverend Otto preached about this in the fall, about the graphic they had put out. And this graphic has 7 blue ovals, and at the center is love. And then it's surrounded by 6 other values: pluralism, interdependence, equity, generosity, justice, and evolution. So this is a big change, this proposal. No more numbered principles. Instead, we have a collection of values, which probably not a coincidence that there are 7 of them. They're easing us into this shift. There are some other changes in there too, like we don't name 6 distinct sources of our faith, but instead we just talk about the breadth of inspiration. And the values have definitions, and you can see in those definitions some language from our current principles, as well as from the proposed 8th principle. Like in equity, the definition starts, we declare that every person has the right to flourish with dignity and worthiness. Some words that might sound familiar to you from our principles now. And just a few weeks ago, the commission put out their full proposal. So they've made changes again after conversations and surveys. And now there's a new image, and it looks like this. This is how, yeah, right? It's really good, right? It's much better than the blue PowerPoint ovals. So this is how they describe the image. This image is of a chalice with an overlay of the word love over the flame, with 6 outstretched arms that create a circle around each of the core values and form a 6-petal flower shape. Each arm is a different color, and clockwise they are interdependence, orange, equity, red, transformation, purple, pluralism, dark blue, generosity, teal, and justice, yellow. So this image is the new proposal from the committee, and this is their final proposal. This is the work they were asked to do. And this year at General Assembly, we will be taking the first vote in the Article 2 revision process. This vote will consider some proposed amendments that the board and delegates might put forth. And then if it passes with a majority vote, just a simple majority, then next year in 2024, we will vote again. And that vote could lead to it being adopted as part of the bylaws of our Unitarian Universalist Association. That is the bureaucracy behind all of these changes and values and principles. Because Article 2, where right now our principles are, exists in the bylaws of our organization. That's where our covenant is. And so there are rules about how you change bylaws. It's not the same as just saying, oh, here's the thing we believe. There are rules, there are procedures that we undergo. And then on top of Article 2, on top of the proposed 8th principle, this year at General Assembly, we will also be electing a new UUA president. That's a lot of things that are happening all at once. But change is kind of how we do things in Unitarian Universalism. There's an excerpt from the proposal that I deeply love. It says, "Love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love." Love is at the center. And that's what I wanted to name this service, but it turns out that's what Reverend Otto named his service on Article 2. It's a good title, right? With both of those graphics. Love is at the center. It grips you. All of these values all centered around love. And so I thought I'd think about something else, maybe related to the margins, right? We talked about love at the center. How do we bring the margins in, which really aligns with the 8th principle? And I went back and forth and eventually just called this sermon, "The Center and the Margins." We're just going to talk about all of it. When we say love is at the center, when I say that, when Reverend Otto says that, and the Article 2 Study Commission, we mean that love is the core, grounding, main idea or value or thought around which things circle. Right? Like in both of the graphics from the Study Commission, love is at the middle and other values expand from there. And in the reading that Melissa read earlier, Reverend Joe Cherry describes the center as what holds our faith together, what allows us to stretch farther into the future. The center is our grounding. It's our home base. It's the thing that we know to be true and steady as we explore new ideas. It's where we are anchored, what gives us support as we reach and grow and shift. But sometimes that's not how we think about the center. Sometimes the center can be the status quo, the thing we don't really think or talk about, but have implicitly made the most important, implicitly centered in our lives and our experiences. When we talk about racial justice, we often talk about decentering whiteness, which means actually starting to notice the things we take for granted and what we are giving importance, and then making the shifts we want to make. And when we talk about the center in that way, that's when we start to talk about the margins. The margins are what has been pushed out, what's been ignored or de-emphasized. Like when we talk about people with marginalized identities, people whose histories and experiences have not been centered in society, in our congregations, in our denomination. And so then we talk about taking the margins and bringing them back to the center. When I hear that, that reminds me of the center being the status quo, and then expanding and shifting where that center is and what it looks like by bringing in the margins. It's always a balance, the center and the margins. Finding ways to be grounded and supported, that's important. But we also don't want to let values we don't mean to center end up there in the middle. We want to stretch and grow and shift at the speed of trust and relationship and covenant, which is not always the speed of institutions, as we know. So I said earlier that maybe we would join other congregations this year in adopting the eighth principle. Why would we do that if soon there might not be any principles at all, and the language and values of the eighth principle might already be in Article 2? Why would we still take that vote as a congregation? Well, we would take that vote to adopt the eighth principle because we as a congregation and a community affirm and promote the language and vision and values of the eighth principle. We would do it because it is in alignment with who we are and who we want to be and what we want our faith to look like. And we want to make that explicitly clear. And also, we would do it because we know it's possible that Article 2 won't pass, either in this first vote or if it passes the first vote, in the second vote. And if it doesn't pass, then we may be shifting as a denomination to voting on the eighth principle to add it to our principles that would still be there. And if we do get to that point, the more congregations that have adopted the eighth principle, the better. The clearer it will be how much support those words, those values have within our faith. We would do it, take this vote on the eighth principle, because we believe that its values are at the center of who we are as a congregation and as a denomination. And even if the changes to Article 2 are approved, even if they go into effect, there is nothing stopping us as a congregation from adopting, using, abiding by, following the principles, the eighth principle, or anything else that we choose, right? We are a member congregation of the UUA, but the things that we believe in and use to guide our values and our actions, those things go beyond what is in the bylaws of the Association of Congregations to which we belong. And so we can vote on the eighth principle. We can write our own mission statements and covenants. We can decide who we are as First Parish in Malden within the wider context of the Unitarian Universalist Association. In all of this, the Article 2 Study Commission knows that what they are proposing is a big change. They know that no longer having numbered principles might be hard. It is a different way of being UU than many of us have experienced. But I really love this language they put in the report, this wider report that isn't just the proposed changes, but also explains their process and their thoughts around it. They say, we recognize the fact that the proposed version of Article 2 we have presented is indeed a significant departure from our current version, just as past changes to Article 2 were significant changes from their predecessors. We continue in the line of proposing changes that fit the times in which we live. We fully expect that one day another commission will review our work and significantly change it. We are writing this in pencil, not etching it in stone. The power of making a proposal knowing and hoping and crossing every finger that in the future, Unitarian Universalists will change it again, that's really powerful. And that's also the core of who we are in so many ways. In a 1922 book called Which Way? A Study of Universalists and Universalism, Reverend Lewis B. Fisher said the following. He's a theologian and was the dean of a Universalist seminary. He says, Universalists are often asked to tell where they stand. The only true answer to give to this question is that we do not stand at all. We move. We do not stand still, nor do we defend any immovable positions. We grow as all living things forever must do. The main question with Universalists main questions are not where we stand, but which way are we moving? Old, worn phrases are always losing their old meanings and must forever be finding new meanings in the light of new expressions. This was true 100 years ago when he wrote it, and it continues to only be more true as we learn more about the world and explore who we are as a denomination. So, beloveds, we move. That is what we do as Unitarian Universalists. We change and we grow and we shift. It is in the bones of our denomination. It is at the root of covenant and relationship, two centerpieces of who we are. And even when it is scary, when it is overwhelming and confusing, we know that we do it together. And that, too, is at the center of who we are. May it be so. I invite you to remain seated as we sing hymn number 123, Spirit of Life.